Hello students. Today we cover the English chapter Mrs. Packletide's Tiger. Mrs. Packletide, she was a vain individual whose main aim in life was to outshine her neighbor Luna Bimberton. When she came to know that Luna Bimberton had recently been carried 11 miles in an aeroplane by an Algerian aviator, she was smitten with great jealousy. She had a strong desire to do something for run down Luna's adventure. So she decided to hunt a tiger and to procure his skin. If successful in doing so, her photographs would appear in the papers. Luna Bimberton, she was neighbor of Mrs. Packletide. She had much like characters of her neighbor. He had strong belief in show-off. The recent thing done by her which caused a lot of annoyance to Mrs. Packletide. She declined the invitation to the luncheon Mrs. Packletide had thrown in her honor and refused to look at the single newspaper for weeks for the fear of reading about her neighbor's feats. Miss Mubin, she was paid companion of Mrs. Packletide and very clever, opportunistic, and money-minded. Firstly, she advised Mrs. Packletide that the 1,000 rupees she paid for an old tiger was too much. After tiger killing, she used the fact that tiger was not killed by Packletide's bullet as opportunity and blackmail Mrs. Packletide and successfully extorted a weekend cottage from her. Now let us see some words and their meanings. Nimrod, a mighty hunter. Ostensibly, supposedly. Propitious, favorable. Rendezvous, meeting. Tethered, fastened. Thumb, nail pack of patience cards, small-sized playing cards to play solitaire. Ambling, walk or move at a slow, relaxed pace. Tawny, a brownish-orange or yellowish-brown color. Senile, characteristic of old age. Book of patterns, book showing the color patterns of racing. Stables, with colors worn by jockeys. Post time the start of horse race and deadline for placing a bet. Les fauves, French for the wild animals. Incidental, secondary. Mrs. Packletide was an English lady who was overcome with a strong desire to shoot a tiger. Basically she was not adventurous or brave, but she was smitten with jealousy when her friend, Luna Bimberton, had recently been carried in an aeroplane by an Algerian pilot. Mrs. Packletide wanted to outshine her and longed to prove that she was no less. Her ultimate desire was to obtain a tiger skin and display it on the wall of her house. If she succeeded in killing a tiger, her photograph would appear in the press and she would host a party in Curzon Street in Luna Bimberton's honor, but the talk would be of her hunting expedition. She also planned to present a tiger claw brooch on Luna's next birthday. All her motives were largely dominated by her dislike of Luna. Circumstances proved to be favorable. An old and weak tiger was visiting a neighboring village in search of food. Mrs. Packletide offered to pay 1,000 rupees to anyone who would help her in shooting a tiger. The villagers got very tempted as 1,000 rupees was a lot of money in those days. They made all the efforts to confine the tiger within the village. Children were posted day and night on the outskirts of the local jungle to drive the tiger back to the village. Cheaper kind of goats were scattered here and there, to keep the tiger there. Mothers were told not to sing lullabies to their children loudly, lest the tiger's sleep should be disturbed. The only anxiety was lest the tiger should die of old age before the day of hunting. On the fateful night, Mrs. Packletide came along with a paid companion, Miss Mubin. A platform had already been constructed in a comfortable and conveniently placed tree by the villagers. Both the ladies sat on the platform. A goat with a loud bleat was tied at proper distance from the tiger. Meanwhile the tiger appeared on the scene and slowly walked towards the goat. Mrs. Packletide fired a shot with her rifle. The tiger fell down to one side. The excited villagers celebrated by beating drums and singing. Mrs. Packletide was also too happy. Miss Mubin was very clever and alert. She drew Mrs. Packletide's attention to the fact that the bullet had actually hit the goat and the tiger had died due to heart attack, caused by the loud report of the rifle. Miss Mubin pointed out that the tiger bore no wound. Mrs. Packletide was disappointed, but she consoled herself with the thought that she possessed the tiger skin. The villagers agreed to keep the secret, for they were happy to receive the money. Mrs. Packletide wasn't insecure about Miss Mubin, for she was a paid companion. Mrs. Packletide's picture appeared in 2 weeklies. Luna refused to attend the lunch party but coldly accepted the tiger claw brooch. Miss Mubin was very money-minded and cunning. She thought of exploiting this weak point of Mrs. Packletide. She blackmailed Mrs. Packletide by saying what would happen if Luna learned that Mrs. Packletide had shot the goat and not the tiger. Shrewd and clever, Miss Mubin hinted that she wanted money to buy a weekend cottage near Dorking. To keep her mouth shut, Mrs. Packletide was forced to pay for that cottage. Miss Mubin named the cottage, the Wild Beasts. Since then Mrs. Packletide never indulged in big game shooting. She confided to her friends that incidental expenses were too heavy for such kind of hunting. Thank you. Please make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel. We wish you the very best. Until next time, bye.